In order to sort through these points, I'm going to basically start by figuring out how the data is sorted out. So I kind of alluded to earlier this kind of single line. We didn't really, and we don't have any double lines here. Let me show you what a double line looks like with just a panel real fast. So if I come into a panel and I just press 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I right click on that panel and I say multi-line data. What it's doing here is actually now I have 5 different parts within this panel as opposed to a typical panel where it's just kind of one piece. If I then plug that into a component, what you see here is this kind of double line. And what that line is telling me is that there's actually more than one bit of information coming across, where in all these cases it's just kind of one data item coming across. This double dashed line is something different, and this panel is starting to allude to it. The way Grasshopper organizes information is into what's called data trees. Let's start to kind of see this with this parameter viewer here under utility. I'm going to click on that and place it out on my canvas. The reason they're kind of called data trees, it breaks up the data into what it refers to as branches. In this particular case, it's saying it has 4 branches, and each with those 11 values within those branches. And so if I go back to how my grid is defined, and I see I have a 3 here and a 10 here. Now when I say that I have 3, actually when I put in 3 for the X value, it's actually defining those things as cells, if you remember. So I have 3 cells coming back here, but I actually have 4 points, right? And so what it's doing here is saying within the 4 branches are actually each one of these rows along here is a separate branch. And within those branches are 11 points each. And so here it's counting, again, initially defined as cells. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but then there's 11 total points within that. So you can see here I actually have 4 rows coming across with 11 values each, and those are sorted into 4 groups essentially, or 4 branches with 11 values each. Now there's some complexity to this list right now because there's these kind of leading zeros, and so the first way to kind of clean that up is you can actually right click on this side here. You notice there's a difference. If I right click here, it's kind of giving me tools to control the whole component. If I right click on any one of these particular letters, it's actually giving me control over those particular outputs. And all of these functions here all have, except for expression, all have something to do with how the data is sorted into branches. I'm going to go simplify. And what it does is it's getting rid of those kind of leading zeros. And so it uses this kind of curly bracket notation. And, you know, if there's this one branch that doesn't have any kind of sub branches off of it, it's just going to have, should just have this kind of single integer. And then beyond that, it's going to give you kind of a semicolon and then develop into additional numbers. So if you have any experience with coding or any of that type of stuff, the kind of notation will seem fairly familiar. If you have no background with coding at all, it's going to be a little bit to learn, but as you kind of get into the program, you'll start to kind of understand it more and more. And I think within this tutorial, as we move along, I'll try to explain it the best I can. Again, it's 4 branches with 11 columns. So if I think about this in my column lines, you know, my 0 line is going to be where, again, if I come back to my origin point, which started my grid, is going to be this line. And then my far line is going to be my 3 line, essentially. And so what I want to do is parse through my 1 and 2 line and actually get rid of some of those values, because I have within the Eames house, there's a consistent main grid at 0 and a main grid at 3, and then there's these kind of intermediate points at 1 and 2. And so the way I'm going to do that is by using some of these sets values over here. The first set I want to do is actually get into creating this list of numbers, and then I'm going to use those numbers then to call these different parts. And so the first component I'm going to use is series. So again, using one of the shortcuts, and I'm just going to type in series here. And so what series allows me to do is actually develop a 0 through 3, just again, kind of a data input component. So within the series, the first numbers in the series is going to be 0, which is going to be a call to the 0 line. The next part of this is going to be the step size. So I'm just dealing with integers. So 1 is perfect. And then C is the amount of values. And I actually want to base that amount of values on how many rows of columns I have. So what I'm going to do is go from this knob over here and actually plug that into my C value. By going back to this, as I then change my amount of columns, it's going to be a dynamic relationship that at the end of the day, it's always the interior columns that get removed and the exterior columns stay continuous regardless of how many column lines I have. Now, this is just 3 in reference to the cell outlines. I actually need 4 here. And so another thing I'm going to do here, this number is always going to want to be 1 plus the amount of actual cells I have. So I'm going to right click on the C, and under this expression portion, there's an expression editor here. And expressions are basically a way of writing kind of algebraic equation. In this case, it's going to be quite simple because I just want to add one value to the input source. And that input source is going to be defined as x. And then I'm just going to say x plus 1. And then I'm going to say commit changes. And what that's going to do is take my 3, add 1 to it, and then it's going to be 4, essentially. So now I have this 0, 1, 2, 3. And so this is just a way of basically getting the names of these different branches, which are, 0, 1, 2, 3. And then the next step is I actually want to convert those to paths. So similar to this kind of notation, I can use another parameter over here to do that. And I'm actually just going to use a shortcut and say path, and I actually want a data path, so it has this kind of tree symbol. I believe that is under, this primitive section. So if I plug this into here, it's actually going to convert that into the data path notation, so it's comparable to my data with 4 branches over here.